Karoline Leavitt stunned viewers across the nation when she took on Hollywood heavyweight Robert De Niro during a heated live TV exchange that's now dominating the internet. What started as a routine segment quickly morphed into an all-out, verbal showdown, with Leavitt delivering a series of brutal, calculated remarks that left De Niro visibly shaken, and the audience watching in disbelief. It was supposed to be another political commentary slot, the kind that tends to blend into the background noise of daytime television. But this time something different happened. From the moment Leavitt took her seat across from De Niro, it was clear she had no intention of playing nice or deferring to celebrity status. With sharp poise and surgical precision, she called out what she described as the hypocrisy of elite Hollywood activists. And De Niro, known for his outspoken political opinions, was clearly not expecting the heat. Leavitt didn't just disagree with De Niro, she dismantled him point by point. Without raising her voice or breaking composure, she confronted the actor on his past statements, questioned the credibility of his political positions, and challenged the logic of his rhetoric. "You sit in your mansion and scold working class Americans about who they should vote for," she said at one point. "But when was the last time you stepped outside your gated community and listened to the people you claim to care about?" The line hit hard. De Niro blinked, shuffled in his seat, and tried to respond, but Leavitt wasn't done. She followed, up with examples, citing De Niro's vocal support for policies she argued have hurt the very communities he claims to defend. "It's easy to stand on a stage and lecture the public," she said, "but real leadership means understanding the consequences of your words and actions." As De Niro attempted to defend himself, things quickly escalated. His response was a mix of visible frustration and disbelief, perhaps not at her arguments, but at the sheer force with which they were delivered. His voice rose, and at one point, he lashed out with a dismissive wave and a few choice words that couldn't be repeated on air. But Leavitt didn't flinch. What followed was one of the most viral moments of the broadcast. De Niro, visibly angry, muttering under his breath while Leavitt sat motionless, watching him with a calm, steady gaze. That single frame, her stone-cold poise contrasted against his explosive reaction, has been clipped and shared across every platform imaginable. The internet exploded, not just with commentary, but with memes, debates, and millions of replays. In mere hours, the segment became the #1 trending topic across social media. Commentators and viewers alike weighed in on the exchange, with many praising Leavitt's ability to stand her ground. Even those who didn't agree with her politics acknowledged the skill with which she controlled the conversation. Analysts called it a masterclass in composure, noting that De Niro's emotional unraveling only magnified her impact. Behind the scenes, the fallout was immediate. Networks scrambled to replay the footage, ratings spiked, and opinion segments dissected every second of the encounter. Meanwhile, De Niro's representatives issued a vague statement about passionate exchanges in live media, while Leavitt's team embraced the moment as proof of her effectiveness in high-pressure debates. What makes the confrontation so compelling isn't just the drama, it's the symbolism. It became, for many, a proxy battle between two very different Americas, one represented by the coastal celebrity elite, the other by a new generation of conservative voices who are unafraid to challenge long-standing cultural icons. Leavitt's performance didn't just rattle De Niro, it reshaped the dynamics of media discourse, proving that youth and sharp intellect can outmatch age and fame in the court of public opinion. And yet, it wasn't just about defeating a famous name on TV. Leavitt's strategy was deeper. She made a point not just to attack, but to expose contradictions, to show that celebrity doesn't equal credibility, and that passion without policy knowledge is a weak foundation in any political argument. Her calm, deliberate tone made every line hit harder, not just because of what she said, but how she said it. By the time the cameras cut away, the verdict was already in. The live studio audience, initially split, had clearly shifted. Applause broke out not for the most famous person in the room, but for the one who dared to challenge him and won. The clip became a rallying cry for conservatives online, and a harsh lesson for public figures who underestimate their opponents. In the end, this was more than just a viral moment. It was a turning point. Leavitt proved that even in a media landscape saturated with celebrity influence and prepackaged narratives, there's still room for raw debate, and that sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room isn't the loudest, but the one that speaks with clarity, facts, and conviction. De Niro may have walked into the studio expecting applause. Instead, he walked out with a viral defeat and a reminder that in today's arena of public opinion, even icons aren't immune to being called out and outmatched live and in real time. As the clip continued to dominate timelines and news cycles, the ripple effect spread far beyond the confines of a single studio. Overnight, Karoline Leavitt became a household name, not just within conservative circles, but across the broader political spectrum. Commentators from both sides began debating her approach, her preparedness, and the implications of her confrontation with De Niro. Was this a moment of political courage, or just viral theater? Either way, the impact was undeniable. Interviews poured in. Podcasts, news shows, and political panels all wanted Leavitt's take on what had happened. But rather than gloating or leaning into triumphalism, she took a different route, doubling down on her core message. "It's not about Robert De Niro," she said in a follow-up interview. "It's about accountability. If you're going to use your platform to influence the American people, then you better be ready to defend your ideas, not just shout slogans." That statement resonated. In an era where substance is often sacrificed for sound bites, Leavitt's unapologetic focus on facts and clarity struck a chord with audiences tired of media pageantry. For many young viewers, particularly those politically disengaged or skeptical of both major parties, the moment offered something refreshingly different. A figure willing to challenge the cultural status quo without theatrics or hysteria. Meanwhile, De Niro's side remained largely silent. A few celebrities rushed to his defense online, dismissing the exchange as gotcha TV or ambush tactics, but their words lacked traction. The video spoke for itself. It wasn't a trap, it was a challenge, and one he simply hadn't been prepared to meet. In the court of public opinion, silence often speaks louder than spin, and in this case it screamed defeat. Politically, the moment was capitalized on almost instantly. Campaign ads began repurposing the footage. Conservative PACs highlighted Leavitt's calm confrontation as a defining moment for a rising generation of leadership, and liberal outlets scrambled to reframe the narrative, some editing the clip to downplay the most explosive moments. But by then, it was too late. The uncut footage was everywhere, etched into the digital consciousness. Beyond the media, the cultural significance of the clash continued to grow. College campuses held debate watch parties featuring the clip. Opinion columns dissected the symbolism behind Leavitt's calm demeanor versus De Niro's emotional reaction. Was it generational? Cultural? A referendum on the power of celebrity. In shaping politics, there were no easy answers, but one thing was clear. Something shifted that day. For Leavitt, this wasn't just a win, it was a launchpad. Invitations to speak at major political conferences started pouring in. Her social media following exploded, and perhaps most importantly, she became a touchstone for how to engage in political debate without sacrificing dignity or clarity. Her performance offered a roadmap for a different kind of conservatism, one rooted in argumentation over anger, logic over volume. But there was also a broader lesson embedded in the fallout. That celebrity, once a shield in political discourse, no longer guarantees invincibility. In fact, in a media environment where everyone has access to the full footage and can judge for themselves, reputation alone isn't enough. If anything, it invites higher scrutiny. The battle between Leavitt and De Niro also revealed the growing hunger among audiences for authenticity. The overly polished, overly rehearsed political figure is losing traction. What people want on both sides is someone who speaks clearly, stands their ground, and doesn't back down in the face of star power. Leavitt embodied that at a crucial moment, and the reaction confirmed the public's appetite for more. As for De Niro, his legacy as an actor remains untouched, but his credibility as a political commentator took a serious hit. He may continue to appear at rallies and awards shows, but the image of him floundering on live television while being calmly confronted by someone half his age will be difficult to shake. In the days following the exchange, even late-night hosts, often friendly territory for De Niro, began referencing the incident with a mixture of awkward humor and subtle critique. The tone had changed. He wasn't just a revered actor anymore. He had become a symbol of how not to handle political confrontation. That shift, subtle as it may seem, marked the end of an era where celebrity outrage was enough to dominate a narrative. For Karoline Leavitt, the path forward is wide open. The moment didn't just elevate her profile, it set a new standard for engagement. She proved that it's possible to be fierce without being frenzied, principled without being preachy, and effective without being egotistical. In a landscape flooded with noise, she managed to cut through. And for anyone paying attention, the message was loud and clear. In this new era of political discourse, strength is measured not by how loudly you shout, but by how well you stand your ground, even when the spotlight burns hot, and the opponent is one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema. In the weeks that followed, Karoline Leavitt's clash with Robert De Niro transformed from a viral moment into a case study in modern political communication. Media training seminars cited her performance as an example of how to win under pressure. Strategists across the political spectrum began analyzing her tone, pacing, and rhetorical structure, not because they agreed with her politics, but because they recognized the precision of her delivery. She didn't rely on personal attacks or ad hominem jabs. Instead, Leavitt weaponized facts, timing, and restraint, an approach that felt revolutionary in an age dominated by shouting matches and chaotic panel shows. Political veterans took notice. Some quietly admitted that if more candidates had her discipline, the tone of American politics could shift significantly. Meanwhile, in conservative circles, Leavitt's name quickly rose in the ranks. She was no longer just another young voice in the Republican movement. She became a symbol of its future. Grassroots supporters admired her fearlessness, seeing in her someone who could go toe-to-toe with legacy media and win. Establishment figures, even those hesitant about the more populist tone of recent years, recognized her strategic value. She was articulate, controlled, and impossible to dismiss. But perhaps what made the moment endure was its reach beyond partisanship. It didn't matter whether someone leaned left or right. Viewers recognized the significance of watching an unflinching, focused voice hold her own against a cultural titan. De Niro, with decades of acclaim and a reputation for political bombast, was reduced to exasperation. Leavitt, by contrast, elevated herself by never losing control, even when the conversation spiraled. Social media kept the moment alive. Clips continued to circulate with millions rewatching and reacting. Young influencers, some political, others not, used the footage as a rallying cry for generational change. In comment sections and reaction videos, one theme kept repeating, "Finally, someone said what we've all been thinking." The exchange also reawakened questions about the role of celebrities in political discourse. For decades, public figures from Hollywood had lent their voices to causes, often with enormous influence. But after Leavitt's takedown, the dynamic seemed to shift. Suddenly, there was a demand for substance. People began asking, is this celebrity actually informed? Or are they just repeating talking points without understanding the details? That shift in perception, subtle but powerful, marked a cultural moment. It signaled that audiences were tired of being lectured by the elite and hungry for accountability, regardless of where it came from. Leavitt wasn't just another talking head. She represented a backlash to performative politics, and she did it not with volume, but with clarity. In the months after the confrontation, Leavitt's public appearances became high-profile events. She was invited to headline conservative conferences, address youth coalitions, and speak at academic panels on media and culture. Though she had previously been underestimated by many in the political establishment, she now found herself being courted by donors and strategists who saw her as more than a commentator, perhaps even as a candidate. But even amid the rising praise, Leavitt stayed on message. She resisted the urge to bask in the viral fame. Instead, she kept pushing forward, framing the De Niro exchange not as a personal win, but as proof that ideas still matter in public debate. "We're not here to be liked," she said in a subsequent interview. "We're here to make the conversation honest again." That mindset is precisely what made the moment resonate so widely. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a challenge to the political and media status quo. And in now, winning that challenge, Karoline Leavitt didn't just go viral, she became a force. One that even the most seasoned voices in politics and entertainment would now have to contend with. The De Niro incident may have begun as a surprise skirmish on live television, but it ended up marking the arrival of a new voice, sharp, unyielding, and unmistakably capable of changing the game. As the noise of the internet moved on to other controversies, one thing remained certain. Karoline Leavitt had arrived, and she wasn't backing down. As Karoline Leavitt continued her media tour, the narrative shifted from viral moment to political ascent. What started as a single televised clash evolved into a defining chapter in her public trajectory. More than just a flash in the news cycle, it was now the foundation of a brand built on clarity, conviction, and confrontation without chaos. Behind closed doors, political operatives were taking her seriously. Think tanks reached out, eager to align her with policy initiatives. Donor networks began floating her name as a future congressional or senatorial candidate. Some went even further. Whispers of national ambitions, of grooming a future running mate or even presidential contender were being passed along in political circles. What gave those whispers weight was not just the De Niro incident itself, but how Leavitt handled the aftermath. She didn't chase controversy, but she didn't run from it either. She remained active, not reactive. In every follow-up appearance, she doubled down on substance, brushing aside petty media jabs and steering interviews back to policy, values, and principles. Her strategy was clear. Stay above the noise, but never back away from a fight. Meanwhile, her opposition scrambled to counter her rising influence. Progressive commentators attempted to reframe the incident, painting her as a provocateur or media opportunist. But these attacks largely fell flat. Unlike many in the viral outrage economy, Leavitt didn't trade in emotion or exaggeration. Her arguments were well-sourced, her delivery calm, and her composure unshakable. That made her criticism harder to dismiss. For every attempted smear, there seemed to be 1,000 more voices amplifying her message. Young voters, particularly women on the right, began to see her as a role model, someone who could challenge establishment power without compromising integrity. In a political culture hungry for authenticity, she had quickly become one of its most compelling figures. The ripple effects reached far beyond partisan politics. Universities began inviting her to speak, not as a novelty, but as a respected voice in generational debate. Panels featuring media analysts, professors, and public figures studied her live TV performance not just for its political impact, but for its rhetorical execution. What made her argument so effective? Why did it resonate across ideological lines? The answer, many concluded, was a rare combination of confidence, clarity, and control. As the cultural conversation continued to evolve, so did Leavitt's influence. She began launching initiatives focused on civic literacy and media accountability. She visited college campuses, hosted town halls, and participated in policy forums. Unlike many political figures who peak quickly and fade, she demonstrated staying power, an ability to shape conversations rather than just react to them. Meanwhile, Robert De Niro receded from the political spotlight. His public appearances became more cautious, his interviews more filtered. Whether intentional or not, the contrast between him and Leavitt became symbolic. One represented an era of unchallenged celebrity commentary, the other a new wave of fact-driven confrontation. And for many, it was clear which voice they trusted more. Months later, political analysts were still dissecting that moment on live TV, not because it was scandalous or dramatic, but because it had marked a turning point. It revealed something that had been building quietly in the public psyche, a deep weariness with empty rhetoric and performative outrage. Leavitt's performance cut through because it didn't feel like a performance at all. It felt real. And in a world of curated personas, that authenticity was power. For Leavitt, the path ahead was still unwritten, but it was undeniably wide. Whether she chose to run for office, build a media platform, or become a thought leader in the conservative movement, one thing was clear. She had reshaped the rules. She'd proven that you don't need to be loud to be effective, and you don't need to be famous to win. You just need to be prepared, principled, and unafraid. And so, what began as a viral clash became something far greater. It was a political awakening for viewers, for voters, and perhaps even for Leavitt herself. The moment may have belonged to live television, but its impact stretched far beyond the screen, echoing in classrooms, campaign offices, and dinner table debates across the country. One moment, one voice, and a whole new conversation. As the political landscape continued to evolve, Karoline Leavitt didn't fade into the background like so many others whose viral moments had come and gone. Instead, she did the opposite. She leveraged that momentum with surgical precision, channeling public interest into influence and influence into action. She launched a nationwide speaking tour titled Truth Over Celebrity, drawing crowds in both red and purple states. The tour wasn't about reliving the Niro exchange. It was about unpacking the larger issues it exposed: elitism, political disconnection, and the cultural double standard that insulated celebrities from accountability. The crowds came not just for entertainment, but to be challenged, informed, and engaged. Students, blue-collar workers, suburban parents, they all showed up, curious to see what the buzz was about. And most left as believers in what she represented: a grounded, articulate, and unapologetically bold brand of conservatism that refused to bow to stardom. Her social media platforms transformed from basic commentary channels into hubs of policy, breakdowns, myth-busting videos, and responses to trending issues, each delivered with the same confident calm that had become her signature. She didn't scream. She didn't virtue signal. She educated, critiqued, and exposed contradictions with the same precision that had left De Niro speechless. Major media outlets, some friendly, many not, continued to request interviews. And each time she stepped into the spotlight with the same disciplined energy, never losing sight of her message. Even when confronted with hostile hosts or loaded questions, she remained collected, disarming critics with facts and reframing questions in ways that turned attacks into opportunities. Political figures took note. Senators invited her to testify at hearings on media bias and cultural influence. Governors requested her insights on messaging and youth outreach. National think tanks began citing her strategies as models for breaking through hostile media environments. And as election cycles approached, her name increasingly appeared on shortlists, not just as an influencer or commentator, but as a candidate. Yet through it all, Leavitt never acted like she'd arrived. In every interview, every town hall, she reminded her audience that the work wasn't about one viral clip or one televised win. It was about restoring honesty to public discourse. "What I did wasn't magic," she said during a packed event in Arizona. "I came prepared. I knew what I believed, and I refused to be intimidated. That's not exceptional. That's how every American deserves to feel when they speak up." That message of empowerment through knowledge, courage through preparation, resonated. For many in the audience, it wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a call to action. She encouraged others to step forward, to stop conceding ground in culture and media just because the other side had a bigger microphone. And people listened. By the one-year anniversary of the now famous exchange, retrospectives were everywhere. Cable news reran the clip with updated commentary. Podcasts dissected it all over again. Political documentaries included it in segments about generational change in American politics. And Leavitt? She marked the date not with self-congratulation, but with the launch of a nonprofit initiative aimed at training young Americans in media literacy and debate skills. The contrast between her approach and the media figures she critiqued had never been clearer. Where others sought attention, she built impact. Where others trended, she transformed. She wasn't just responding to a moment. She was creating a movement. And still, she remained one of the most polarizing figures. In the national conversation, her critics continued to throw labels. Too young, too polished, too confrontational. But the attacks rang hollow, because for every dismissive voice, there were thousands more who saw what she had done and said, "That's what leadership looks like now." The Leavitt-De Niro moment might have begun as a headline, but it ended up as a turning point in modern American discourse. It reminded the nation that ideas still matter, that preparation beats performance, and that no one, not even the most revered cultural icons, is above challenge. Karoline Leavitt didn't just hold her ground that day. She claimed new ground, and she's still building. With every step forward, Karoline Leavitt made it increasingly clear. This wasn't a viral fluke. It was the emergence of a new political archetype. In a climate dominated by outrage, performative allyship, and legacy media figures clinging to their influence, she offered a stark contrast. She was young but not naive. She was bold but not brash. She didn't flinch, didn't pander, and most importantly, didn't apologize for speaking uncomfortable truths. As 2026 loomed, speculation mounted about her next move. Would she run for office, launch her own media platform, lead a new generation of conservative candidates? Insiders close to her hinted at all three. But Leavitt, ever focused, downplayed the chatter. "Titles don't change the mission," she said during a televised town hall. "Whether I'm a host, a candidate, or a citizen, you're still going to hear from me. And I'll still be asking the questions too many are afraid to ask." That clarity of purpose made her more than just a conservative figure. It made her a generational voice. She wasn't afraid to challenge not only the left, but also the complacency on her own side. She criticized Republicans who catered to media approval instead of principle, who played it safe rather than pushing back. Her message was simple. If the fight is for the soul of the country, you don't show up with talking points. You show up with backbone. In the weeks that followed her viral ascension, polls began to shift. Not drastically, but noticeably. Younger voters, particularly independents, began citing her as one of the few political figures they found trustworthy. Not necessarily because they agreed with everything she said, but because she didn't talk down to them. She didn't sugarcoat. She didn't hide behind a brand. What they saw was what they got. And what they got was a challenge. A challenge to wake up, to ask better questions, to stop letting celebrities and media conglomerates dictate what counted as truth. Leavitt's growing base wasn't just red state conservatives. It was anyone, anywhere who had grown tired of the scripted narratives and elite filters on national conversation. Even global media outlets took notice. Foreign policy magazines ran profiles on her approach to communication. European commentators compared her style to political disruptors on their own continent, noting her unflinching clarity in a post-truth world. She was being studied as a case of how to win arguments not by being loud, but by being right. And being ready. Robert De Niro, once the dominant name in the exchange, faded further into the background of the narrative. In truth, it was never about him. He was simply the accelerant, a symbol of an outdated cultural authority now being actively questioned. Leavitt's real victory was not in embarrassing a Hollywood legend. It was in revealing that star power no longer outshined preparation, conviction, and substance. And so, the story of Karoline Leavitt didn't end with a single viral clip. That moment was merely the spark. What followed was a blueprint for a new kind of political engagement, one that didn't rely on institutional power or fame, but on the courage to speak plainly, challenge boldly, and lead unapologetically. She hadn't just destroyed De Niro on live TV. She had disrupted a culture, and in doing so, she had changed the rules for everyone who followed. As 2026 rolled in, Karoline Leavitt stood at a crossroads, one shaped not by calculation but by momentum. Her viral clash with Robert De Niro had long since passed, but the ripple effects continued to shape headlines, inspire discussions, and shift public perception. She had become more than a name. She was a movement unto herself, embodying the frustration, aspiration, and energy of a generation tired of being spoken for. So when she finally made her announcement, there was no shock, just confirmation of what many had suspected. Karoline Leavitt was running for Congress. The launch wasn't theatrical. It wasn't choreographed with celebrity endorsements or Hollywood glitz. It was filmed in a small town hall, her voice steady, her words sharp. She spoke about freedom, about truth, about the decay of institutions that once protected both. And she spoke directly to the voters, not as a politician, but as one of them. I didn't come from money. I didn't come from fame. I came from a place where people believe in hard work, faith, and honesty. And I'm here because you deserve someone who still believes in those things too. Within hours, her campaign announcement was trending. Donations surged. Volunteer lists grew. But more importantly, her message traveled, cutting through the static like it always had. Mainstream pundits tried to downplay her run, calling her inexperienced, untested. But the public had already seen her tested, live and unfiltered, on one of the biggest media stages in the country. And she hadn't just held her own, she'd shifted the balance of power in real time. No debate stage or policy forum could replicate the credibility she'd earned in that moment. It had been her trial by fire, and she had walked out stronger, sharper, and ready. As the campaign unfolded, she continued to challenge narratives and redefine expectations. She met critics head-on but never descended into bitterness. She refused to play the victim even when she was clearly targeted. Her focus remained on principles, not personalities. And voters responded, not because she was perfect, but because she was fearless. Election night was electric. Crowds gathered at community centers and college auditoriums. The results trickled in slowly, but the momentum was unmistakable. By the end of the night, Karoline Leavitt was declared the winner, by a margin no one in the media had predicted. In her victory speech, she didn't dwell on the past or the viral moment that started it all. She looked forward, steady as ever. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about all of us who refused to be silenced, who stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. Tonight, we didn't just win a race, we reclaimed our voice." And just like that, the story that began with a fiery exchange on live television came full circle. Not as a fleeting internet moment, but as the launch of a career built on conviction, clarity, and courage. Karoline Leavitt had arrived, not as a footnote in a media feud, but as a force in American politics. The headlines had faded. The hashtags had moved on. But her mission was just beginning.